All right, strap in everyone. Today's deep dive, well, we're going deep on cybersecurity, but not just any cybersecurity. We're looking at how companies are moving away from VPNs.
You know those virtual private networks we've all used?
Yeah, exactly, VPNs. And they're moving towards something called Zero Trust Network Access, ZTNA for short.
And what's so interesting here is it's not just about a new tech term, swapping out one acronym for another.
Right.
It's a completely different philosophy about security. See, VPNs, they've been the go-to for ages now.
Yeah.
But they work on this idea of a strong perimeter. Once you're in, you're trusted.
Makes sense.
But ZTNA flips that whole thing on its head and says, never trust, always verify, no matter where you're connecting from.
So it's kind of like, I don't know, the difference between having a guard at the front gate versus security checks at every single door inside the building.
That's a great way to put it, and that's absolutely crucial in today's world. I mean, think about it. We've got cloud computing, people working remotely from all over.
And threats. The threat landscape is constantly changing.
It's wild out there.
Oh, it is. So we've got a bunch of resources from Delinea, a company that actually offers a ZTNA solution. And they do a really good job of breaking down why this new approach is such a game changer. By the end of this, you'll really understand the core differences between these two, VPN and ZTNA, and why it honestly matters for anyone using the internet.
Okay, so before we get too far, let's just level set, start with the basics. VPNs, we've all used them, but for those who maybe haven't, how do they actually work?
Imagine you're trying to send super secret message.
Okay.
So you put it in a sealed tube and send it through a network of, say, pipes. That's essentially what a VPN does. It creates this encrypted tunnel through the public internet so your data, it stays protected as it travels between your device and the network you're trying to reach.
Okay, so it's all about creating that secure connection.
But like you were saying before, VPNs, they're starting to show their age a little bit. So what are some of those vulnerabilities, especially in today's world?
Well, one big issue is that VPNs, they're very network-centric.
Okay.
So once you're authenticated, you've proven who you are, you often get access to, a wide range of resources, even if you only really need a small portion of them.
Oh, I see.
It's like giving someone a key to your entire house when all they need is to get into one room.
Yeah, makes sense.
And this creates what we call an expanded attack surface. Basically, more potential entry points for hackers to exploit.
So it's almost like the more access you have, the more vulnerable you become.
You got it. And that's where ZTNA comes in with a different approach.
Okay.
ZTNA is all about microsegmentation and least privilege.
What does that mean?
It means you only get access to what you absolutely need to do your job, nothing more. So it's like having a key card that only unlocks specific doors in a building instead of, giving you access to the whole place.
So if someone did manage to get in, the damage would be contained.
Exactly. They wouldn't be able to sort of move around freely within the network, accessing sensitive information they shouldn't have access to.
Right.
This really gets at the heart of why Delinea, the company we mentioned before, why they're so excited about ZTNA. They actually lay out 13 specific ways that it wins over VPNs.
13, that's a lot.
It is. It's quite a list, but they're important.
Okay, so let's dive into those.
All right.
And I guess the first one they talk about is dynamic versus static access. So what's the key difference there? Good
question. VPNs, they typically give you broad static access. You're in, and you might stay in for hours, even days.
Okay.
But ZTNA, it uses what's called just-in-time access, JIT. So you only get access to the specific resource for the exact time you need it, then it's revoked.
Oh, I see.
Imagine checking out a library book. You have it for a while, then it has to go back.
Gotcha. So it's all about minimizing that window of vulnerability, only granting access when it's absolutely necessary.
Exactly, and that leads right into Delinea's next point about shrinking the attack surface. Because access is so granular with ZTNA, even if an attacker gets through one point, the damage they can do, it's significantly reduced.
Makes sense. Okay, point 3, they talk about identity-centric security.
Right.
What's the main takeaway there?
So with VPNs, the focus is mostly on securing the connection itself. Okay. ZTNA goes further. It focuses on verifying who is accessing what.
Oh.
So think multi-factor authentication, where you have to confirm it's you in a couple of different ways. Strong passwords, and even behavioral analysis to make sure it's really you and not some, malicious actor.
So it's not just about securing the pipe, it's also about making sure the right person is on the other end of that pipe.
That's a great way to put it.
Makes a lot of sense.
And it's about constantly verifying that person. And that brings us to point number 4, which is all about adaptive security versus static credentials.
Okay.
See, VPNs often use static credentials that don't change, even if the user's context changes. With ZTNA, things are much more dynamic. The system is always evaluating things like your location, the security of your device, and even your behavior patterns. If anything seems off, well, it can trigger additional security checks or even, revoke access altogether.
So it's like having a security guard that's actually paying attention and adjusting things based on what's happening.
Exactly. That's a great way to think about it. And this dynamic approach is way more effective at preventing unauthorized access than the set it and forget it approach of a lot of VPNs.
Gotcha. Okay. Point 5 is about performance.
Right.
And we all know VPNs can be a pain when it comes to speed. They can really slow things down.
Yeah.
So how does ZTNA stack up?
Yeah, VPNs often route all your traffic through one central server, and that creates bottlenecks.
I see.
But ZTNA, you connect directly to the application or resource you need. No more going through that central hub.
Okay.
Which means better performance, less lag, and happier users.
So it's a win-win. Better security and a better user experience.
Exactly. Solves a big pain point for a lot of people. And speaking of pain points, let's talk about scalability.
Okay.
As organizations grow, they use more cloud-based resources, and traditional VPNs, they can be a real nightmare to manage. Delinea actually highlights how ZTNA is built for the cloud. It can seamlessly scale to handle these complex, hybrid, multi-cloud environments.
So it's future-proof in a sense. It can adapt as businesses change.
Absolutely. It's about having security that's as agile and dynamic as the businesses it's protecting.
Right. Okay, point 7 is about visibility and control. So what's the advantage of ZTNA there?
Well, one of the things people criticize about VPNs is they don't offer much visibility into what users are actually doing on the network. But ZTNA, it changes that. It provides really detailed logs of user activity, so administrators can see who accessed what, when they accessed it, and what actions they took.
It's like having a security camera that's recording everything.
Exactly. It's about having the data you need to identify potential issues and respond quickly.
Makes sense. Okay, on to point 8, and this is a big one. Combating credential theft.
Big one for sure.
Especially today when data breaches and stolen passwords, it seems like they're happening all the time.
It's a huge problem. And this is where Delinea's integration of privileged access management, or PAM, within its ZTNA framework, this is where it's so valuable.
Okay.
PAM adds this extra layer of security by controlling and monitoring access to critical systems and sensitive data. So even if someone does get their hands on stolen credentials, the damage they can cause is limited.
So it's about limiting how far they can go, how much damage they can do.
Exactly, a crucial safeguard in this day and age.
Okay, point number 9 focuses on application-centric control.
Right.
What's the benefit of that approach?
So with VPNs, you're often granted access at the network level.
Okay.
But ZTNA, it does things differently. Control happens at the application level. So instead of having access to everything on a network, you only have access to the specific apps you need for your job.
Okay, so it's about locking down access to only the essentials, nothing more.
Exactly. And this actually ties into point 10, which highlights how cloud-ready ZTNA is. You see, VPNs were designed for on-premise networks, and they often struggle to adapt to cloud environments. But ZTNA, it's built for the cloud. It can integrate with cloud platforms and services really seamlessly, providing secure access to those cloud-based resources, no need for complex configurations.
So it's a more natural fit for how businesses operate today, with all this cloud computing and remote work.
Absolutely. It's a security solution that's aligned with those needs.
Okay, point 11 focuses on simplifying access management, which I can imagine for IT departments can be a major headache.
Oh, it can be a nightmare.
Yeah.
Managing all those individual VPN connections, especially for big companies, it's a lot.
Right.
But ZTNA offers centralized policy enforcement and automated access controls.
Okay.
So administrators can easily set access permissions, time-based restrictions, apply security measures across the whole organization, all from one place.
So it's about streamlining things, making it easier to manage, which ultimately improves security, right? Because it's easier to maintain consistent policies and controls.
Exactly. It's about working smarter, not harder.
I like that. Okay, we're getting close to the end of Delinea's list here. Point 12 is all about the power of combining ZTNA and PAM.
Right, remember we talked about PAM earlier? How it helps limit the damage if someone does get their hands on stolen credentials?
Yes.
Well, when you combine ZTNA and PAM, you create this really comprehensive security framework that's especially powerful for protecting privileged users.
Yeah.
Those with elevated access to critical systems and data.
The people who have the keys to the kingdom, so to speak.
Exactly. And it makes sense. These users, they need a higher level of scrutiny, more control, and this integrated approach does that.
Okay, so last but not least, the final point on Delinia's list is all about privileged remote access, or PRA.
Yes.
So what makes this solution stand out?
Delinia's PRA offering, it's specifically designed for secure remote access for those privileged users we just talked about. IT admins, vendors, anyone who needs access to critical systems. And what's different from traditional VPNs is it focuses on application-level security. So they're not just given access to the entire network, they only get access to the specific applications and data they need to do their job.
Another example of that least privilege principle in action.
Precisely. It's all about minimizing the attack surface, only granting access to what's absolutely necessary.
Makes sense. This has been a really interesting look at how ZTNA is different from VPNs and sort of how it stacks up. But before we get too far into the weeds, I think it's important to step back and consider the bigger picture here. What are some of the broader implications of this shift? From VPNs to ZTNA, especially with more and more companies moving to the cloud and embracing remote work.
That's a great question. And I think what's really exciting is that ZTNA, it's much more than just a technology upgrade. It really represents a fundamental shift in how we think about security. Moving away from just protecting the perimeter and focusing on verifying and securing every user and every device, regardless of where they're connecting from.
So it's a more proactive, more adaptive approach to security, which is essential these days, with threats constantly changing.
Exactly. And it has implications for everything from how we design networks, manage access, to how we train users, and how we build a culture of security awareness.
Speaking of real-world implications, one of the things that stood out to me in Delinia's material is the challenge of actually implementing ZTNA. It's not just a simple switch you flip, right?
It's definitely not plug and play. It takes careful planning, integrating it with existing systems, and really understanding the organization's specific needs and their security posture.
So it's not one size fits all. Each implementation has to be tailored to the specific environment.
Exactly, and one of the biggest hurdles organizations face is legacy infrastructure. A lot of companies are still using older systems and applications that don't always play well with ZTNA.
So it's like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole.
Exactly, and that often means significant upgrades, workarounds, which adds complexity and cost.
And then beyond those technical challenges, you've got the human element to consider. People are used to working with VPNs. Change can be hard, so how do you get users on board, make sure the transition to ZTNA is smooth?
That's a really good point. User education, it's critical. You need to explain why you're making the change, the benefits of ZTNA, how it'll impact their day-to-day work.
So it's not just about giving them a new tool, it's about bringing them along, explain why it's important.
Absolutely, and that requires communication, good training, and ongoing support, so they can adapt to this new security model.
Right, makes sense. And you mentioned earlier this idea of application visibility and control, AVC. How does that fit into the whole ZTNA picture?
AVC, it's like having a security camera that just focuses on applications.
Okay.
It watches the application traffic, it can detect anything unusual, and enforce those usage and access policies. Think of it as like an extra layer of protection.
So like an extra set of eyes watching over the most critical applications.
Exactly. AVC just enhances ZTNA by providing a more granular, more focused view of what those applications are doing, which can really help organizations identify and stop threats that might otherwise slip through the cracks.
This has been a whirlwind tour of how ZTNA is really changing the game in cybersecurity.
Yeah.
We've covered a lot, so before we move on, let's just quickly recap what we've talked about.
Yeah.
We started by exploring the limitations of those traditional VPNs. Talked about how they often provide that broad, static access that can expand the attack surface and create vulnerabilities.
Right. And then we dove into the world of ZTNA and how it focuses on verifying each user and device before they get access to specific apps or services. We talked about how it uses dynamic, context-based access to minimize the attack surface and really boost security.
And we looked at Delinia's solution as a good example of how those principles are being used and all the advantages it offers over VPNs.
Right, like enhanced security, better user experience, and how easily it scales.
And then we touched on the importance of planning, integration, and user education for successful adoption.
Because ZTNA is a big change.
It is. But it's clearly a significant leap forward in cybersecurity. It offers a much more robust, more adaptable, and frankly more secure approach to remote access, which is essential in today's interconnected world.
Couldn't agree more. Welcome back to the deep dive. In part 1, we really dug into the what and the why of zero trust network access. But in this part, we're going to get practical.
Yeah, let's talk about how it actually works in the real world. Like, let's say a company decides, all right, we're ditching our old VPN, we're going all in on ZTNA. Where do they even start?
Well, the first step is to really understand the lay of the land, They need to take a good, hard look at their current security setup, figure out what their most important assets are, how data moves through their network, map out user roles, permissions, basically get a really clear picture of where they might be vulnerable.
So it's like drawing up a blueprint of their security before they start building anything new.
Precisely. You absolutely need that clear picture to figure out how big of a ZTNA implementation they need and how to customize it to their needs. Then comes the fun part, picking the right ZTNA solution. There are tons of vendors out there, and they all have their own, bells and whistles.
So it's kind of like shopping for a new car. You got to consider your needs, budget, what features are most important to you.
That's a great analogy. And just like with a car, you don't want to end up with a bunch of features you never use, or even worse, a system that doesn't work well with what you already have. And that brings us to another crucial piece of the puzzle, integration.
Right. Companies already have a bunch of security tools they're using, like identity and access management systems, security information and event management, endpoint detection and response platforms. How does ZTNA fit in with all of that?
That's where things can get a little, tricky. It's absolutely essential that ZTNA integrates seamlessly with all those other tools. You don't want to create these silos where different security components aren't talking to each other. It'd be like having different departments in a company refusing to work together. Nothing would get done.
So it's about making sure all these different security tools are working together, sharing information, coordinating their efforts.
Exactly. You want a unified security ecosystem, and ZTNA is kind of like the conductor, making sure everything works together smoothly.
Okay, so let's say a company has managed to get past those initial hurdles, and they've successfully implemented ZTNA. What are some of the real, tangible benefits they can expect to see?
Well, the most immediate and probably the most significant benefit is better security.
Of course.
By really enforcing that principle of least privilege and constantly verifying everything, ZTNA really shrinks the attack surface. It makes it much harder for attackers to get in where they shouldn't or to cause widespread damage.
That's got to be a huge relief, especially with how sophisticated and frequent cyber attacks are becoming.
It is. But the benefits go beyond just, stronger defenses. ZTNA can also make things a lot better for the users themselves.
Wait, really? I always thought security and convenience were like on opposite ends of the spectrum.
That's a common misconception. With ZTNA, you can actually have both. Remember how we talked about VPNs causing those performance bottlenecks?
Yeah.
Well, with ZTNA, since you're connecting directly to what you need, it means faster access, less lag, a smoother workflow overall.
So, win-win.
Yeah.
Better security and a better experience for the users. No more complaints about slow VPN connections.
Exactly. And happier users are usually more productive users, which any company can get behind.
Makes sense. But you mentioned earlier that there can be challenges with adopting ZTNA. What are some of the most common hurdles organizations face?
One of the biggest, especially for larger organizations, is what we call legacy infrastructure. A lot of companies still rely on older systems and applications,
Right.
and those might not be compatible with ZTNA.
Oh, I see.
These legacy systems, they often lack the modern security features you need and might not be able to handle the granular access controls and constant verification that ZTNA requires.
It's like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole.
You got it. And sometimes it means you need major upgrades or have to find creative workarounds, and that adds complexity and cost to the whole thing.
Right, makes sense. It's like renovating an old house.
Yeah.
It's easier to just start fresh.
Exactly. And even if you do manage to get those legacy systems to work with ZTNA, there's always a risk you might accidentally introduce new vulnerabilities or create security gaps.
Right, because those older systems weren't built with the same security principles as ZTNA in mind.
Exactly. So it's a delicate balancing act. Modernizing things, keeping everything secure, and trying to minimize any disruptions.
Okay, so we've talked about the technical challenges, but what about the human side of things? I imagine it can be tough to get everyone on board with a whole new security approach, especially one that requires a different way of thinking.
Oh, absolutely. User resistance to change, it's a very real challenge. People are creatures of habit, right? They like things the way they are, even if it's not the best or safest way.
Yeah, I totally get that. It's like trying to switch to a new operating system on your computer. It can be intimidating and frustrating at first, even if you know it's going to be better in the long run.
That's a perfect analogy. And it's the same with ZTNA. People might be comfortable with their VPNs. They might not want to learn new procedures or change how they work, even if it's ultimately for the best.
So how do you overcome that resistance? How do you make sure the transition to ZTNA is smooth?
Honestly, it all boils down to communication and education. Companies have to be upfront with their users, explain why they're making this change, what the benefits are, how it's going to affect their day-to-day work. It's about making sure people feel like they're part of the process, not just, having something forced on them.
So turning skepticism into understanding, resistance into buy-in.
Exactly. And that takes a multi-pronged approach. You need clear communication from the leadership, training programs that are actually engaging and easy to understand, and ongoing support to address any questions or concerns people have.
So it's not just about giving people a new tool and saying figure it out. It's about walking them through it, making sure they're comfortable and confident using ZTNA.
Exactly. You want to create a culture of security awareness where everyone understands the importance of protecting sensitive information and everyone feels empowered to do their part.
Okay, so we've talked about implementation challenges and the human element.
Yeah.
Now let's zoom out again. Big picture. How do you see ZTNA evolving in the future? What role will it play in shaping cybersecurity going forward?
ZTNA is still relatively new, but it's evolving at an incredible pace. We're already seeing advances in things like automation, how it integrates with other security tools, and support for new technologies like the Internet of Things or IoT and edge computing.
So it's a dynamic field, a lot of exciting things happening.
Oh, for sure. And one of the most exciting trends is the integration of AI, artificial intelligence, and machine learning into ZTNA.
Right, AI and machine learning seem to be everywhere these days.
They are, and cybersecurity is no exception. With ZTNA, AI and ML can help with things like detecting threats, analyzing risk, and enabling more sophisticated adaptive security measures.
So it's like having a virtual security guard that's constantly learning and adapting.
Exactly, and that kind of intelligence and automation is going to be essential as the threat landscape keeps evolving and attacks get even more sophisticated.
What about the rise of IoT and edge computing? How will ZTNA adapt to those? Because it seems like they're just exponentially expanding the attack surface.
That's a fantastic question. It's one of the biggest challenges facing the cybersecurity industry right now. The explosion of IoT devices, edge computing environments, it means more endpoints than ever before, and each one is a potential entry point for attackers.
So it's like having millions of tiny doors that all need to be locked and guarded.
Precisely. And traditional security, like those perimeter-based defenses, they just can't keep up with that.
So where does ZTNA fit in?
Well, ZTNA is actually really well suited to secure those IoT and edge computing environments because it's built on those principles we talked about. Identity-centric security, granular access control, continuous verification.
So instead of trying to build a bigger wall around the network, you're focusing on securing each individual device and user.
Exactly. It's about shifting from perimeter-centric to data-centric. With ZTNA, security follows the data wherever it goes, whoever's trying to access it.
That makes a lot of sense. You're not just securing the network, you're securing the information itself.
Exactly. And that's going to be absolutely crucial as we move towards a world where data is everywhere, being accessed from all sorts of devices and constantly on the move.
This has been a really fascinating look at the practical side of ZTNA and how it's going to impact the future of cybersecurity. But before we wrap up this part of the deep dive, let's just take a minute to reflect on what we've talked about.
Sure, let's recap.
We started by talking about the limits of traditional VPNs and why we need a more modern, more adaptive security approach, especially in today's world of cloud computing and remote access.
Right, and then we dove into the core principles of ZTNA, how it focuses on verifying every single user and device before granting access to anything.
We also talked about Delinia's ZTNA solution as a good example of how those principles are being applied and all the benefits it offers compared to VPNs. Enhanced security, better user experience, seamless scalability.
And we can't forget about the practical challenges of actually implementing ZTNA. The planning, the integration, the legacy infrastructure, it's a lot.
And how important it is to get users on board through education and support.
Absolutely. ZTNA is a big change.
It is. But it really represents a paradigm shift in cybersecurity. We're moving away from that old perimeter-based model towards something that's more dynamic, more focused on identity, and ultimately more driven by data.
It's definitely an exciting time to be working in this field. I'm really eager to see how ZTNA continues to evolve and shape the future of security.
All right, welcome back to the deep dive. So far, we've really dug deep into zero trust network access. We've talked about the theory, the implementation, all those challenges. But now I think it's time to see how it actually works in the real world.
Absolutely. Let's bring ZTNA to life with some real world example, see how it's being used to tackle those security challenges we hear about all the time, across different industries too.
Perfect, yeah. So let's start with an industry where security is absolutely paramount healthcare. We all know how sensitive patient data is. And the potential consequences of a breach are just huge.
Yeah, no kidding. Hospitals, healthcare providers, they're constantly dealing with this massive influx of data. Electronic health records, connected medical devices, even those wearable health trackers people are using now.
It's a lot.
Oh, it is. And traditional security measures, well, they often just can't keep up.
So how's ZTNA changing the game in healthcare? What's it doing that's so different?
Okay, so imagine a doctor. They're trying to access a patient's electronic health record. Maybe they're using a tablet. With ZTNA, it's not just about having a username and password anymore.
Right.
The system actually verifies the doctor's identity, checks the security of that tablet, and then only gives them access to that specific patient's record. Not the whole database, just what they need. And then once the doctor is done, access is revoked, boom, gone.
So it's like having a security guard standing right at the door of that patient's file, making sure only the right people can get in.
That's a great way to picture it. And it's not just about accessing records either. ZTNA can also be used to secure those connected medical devices we talked about, infusion pumps, heart monitors, all those things, protecting them from cyber attacks that could actually harm patients.
Wow, that's amazing. It's really incredible to see how technology can be used to protect not just data, but people's actual well-being. So it's not just healthcare, though. What about other industries?
Right, healthcare is a great example, but ZTNA is being used in lots of places. Let's look at another industry where security is critical, finance.
Yeah, banks, financial institutions, they're prime targets, right?
Oh, absolutely. Cybercriminals are always trying to steal financial data or disrupt their systems. We hear about those massive data breaches all the time. The stakes are incredibly high in finance.
Yeah, for sure. So how are they using ZTNA to fight back? What are they doing?
Well, one way is by securing remote access for their employees. So think about a financial analyst working from home, and they need to get to sensitive market data or trading platforms. With ZTNA, their identity and device are verified before they can even connect.
Okay.
And then they're only allowed to access the specific apps and data they need for their job, nothing else. So even if someone did manage to steal their login info, the damage they could do is pretty limited.
So it's like creating this secure bubble around their activity no matter where they're working from.
Exactly. And it goes beyond individual employees, too. ZTNA can also secure access for third-party vendors, partners, all those people who often need access to sensitive systems and data.
Yeah, you hear about those third-party relationships being a weak link in security sometimes.
Oh, for sure. It's a big risk if it's not handled correctly. But ZTNA gives you that extra control, that visibility you need, making sure anyone who accesses sensitive information is vetted properly, and you can keep a close eye on what they're doing.
These are really good examples. It shows how powerful ZTNA is, how versatile it is, across different industries. But it's not just about protecting data, right? We've got to think about critical infrastructure, too.
Oh, you're absolutely right. Think about our power grid, transportation systems, manufacturing plants, all that stuff.
The stuff that keeps everything running.
Exactly. And those critical infrastructure systems are relying more and more on digital technology. which makes them more vulnerable to cyber attacks.
And a successful attack on one of those systems, I mean, that could be devastating.
Oh yeah, no question. We could be talking about blackouts, transportation networks shutting down, even safety hazards in factories. It's serious stuff.
So how can ZTNA help with that? How can it protect those systems?
It all comes back to those core zero trust principles. Never trust, always verify. So ZTNA can secure access to the control systems that run these critical infrastructure components. So every user, every device, every connection, it's all checked and authorized before it can get access. And that makes it much harder for attackers to move around the network and gain control of those critical systems.
So, like layers of security, each one designed to stop an attacker in their tracks.
Precisely. You want to make it as hard as possible for them to get in, and if they do, you want to limit the damage they can cause.
This has been a really eye-opening look at how ZTNA is actually being used, to solve real problems in the real world. It's clear that this technology has the potential to really change the way we think about cybersecurity, and I think, honestly, it's only going to become more important in the future.
I agree. As more and more organizations move to the cloud, embrace remote work, all that digital transformation stuff, ZTNA is going to be essential for protecting their data and their systems. It's a real paradigm shift, and it's happening right now.
Well, that about wraps up our deep dive into Zero Trust Network Access. We covered a lot of ground, but hopefully this has given everyone listening a better understanding of this technology, how it works, and why it matters. We talked about the challenges, the benefits, and where things are headed in the future. It's a complex topic, but I think one of the biggest takeaways is that security is everyone's responsibility these days.
It really is. Stay informed, stay vigilant, and above all, stay safe out there.
And on that note, we'll sign off. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.